I found a folder with my entire life inside it, hidden in a locked drawer in my boss's office, and none of it should have existed. I need to tell you what happened to me, because I still think about it every single day, and I don't think that feeling is going away anytime soon. I'll call my boss Richard, and by the time I'm done telling you this, you'll understand exactly why I can barely say that name out loud anymore without my hand starting to shake a little. I grew up without a father. My mother raised me completely on her own, working 2 jobs for most of my childhood just to keep us afloat, and whenever I asked about him as a kid, she'd get this tight, guarded look on her face and tell me it was complicated, that he wasn't part of our lives, that I didn't need to know more than that. I stopped asking around the time I turned 12, not because I stopped wondering about him, but because I loved her too much to keep putting that same look on her face every single time. I got hired at a mid-sized consulting firm through a completely ordinary process, an online application, 2 rounds of interviews, an offer that came through about a week later. Richard ran the company. He was sharp and demanding in meetings, but genuinely fair with everyone under him, the kind of boss who made you want to work harder for him, not less, the kind people talked about like he was some kind of exception to how bosses usually are. Within a few weeks I was reporting to him directly, since the department was small, and within a few months, I found myself genuinely admiring him in a way I hadn't admired anyone in a long time. About 5 months into the job, the office went through a major reorganization, clearing out old storage rooms to make space for a growing team. Richard asked me to help him sort through some locked filing cabinets in the back corner of his office that hadn't been touched in years, mostly old client contracts nobody needed anymore. He handed me a full set of keys, told me to pull anything dated before a certain year and box it up for shredding, and then stepped out to take a call that was clearly important, judging by how quickly he left the room. Most of the drawers were exactly what he described, dry old contracts, invoices, nothing remotely interesting. But the bottom drawer of the very last cabinet was locked with a completely different key, one that didn't match anything else on the ring, tucked separately inside a small envelope taped to the underside of the drawer just above it. I almost didn't bother trying it. I genuinely don't know what made me try it anyway, some small itch of curiosity I couldn't quite explain even to myself afterward. Inside was a single folder, thick, worn soft at the edges in that particular way things get when they've been opened and closed hundreds of times over many years. My name was written across the tab in handwriting I didn't recognize, not a client name, not a project code, my actual full name, first and last. I opened it right there on the floor of his office, and my stomach dropped before I even fully understood what I was looking at. Newspaper clippings, yellowed and carefully cut with scissors, my elementary school spelling bee results from a small local paper I didn't even know still existed. My high school graduation announcement, clipped whole from the paper, with a small red circle drawn carefully around my name in the long list of honor roll students. A printed article about a youth debate competition I'd placed second in, an event so small and forgettable I doubted 20 people outside my own school had ever even heard about it happening. Photos too, printed off what looked like old social media profiles, me at 18, at 20, at 22, dates handwritten carefully in the corners in that same unfamiliar handwriting, like someone had been quietly keeping a record. Someone had been collecting pieces of my entire life for as long as I could remember having one. I heard Richard's voice getting closer down the hall, wrapping up his call, and I shoved the folder back into the drawer so fast I nearly tore the corner of it, turned the lock, and was back on my knees pretending to sort through old contracts by the time he walked back through the door. I don't think I said a single real sentence to him for the rest of that day. I answered when spoken to, nodded when I was supposed to nod, and somehow made it through the remaining hours without falling apart at my desk. I don't even remember the drive home that evening. That night, I sat on my kitchen floor with my laptop and searched every version of my mother's name I could think of, her maiden name, her married name, old nicknames people used to call her, next to Richard's name, next to the name of his company, next to anything at all I could think to try. It took almost 3 hours of searching before I finally found it, an old regional newspaper archive from over 2 decades ago, a small grainy photo taken at some kind of company event, my mother standing in a group of employees at a firm located 2 towns over from where I grew up. Richard was standing directly beside her in the photo, close enough that it clearly wasn't just an accident of where people happened to stand for a group picture. The caption underneath listed the department they both worked in. It was, I would later confirm, an earlier version of the very same company where, years later, without either of us ever saying a single word about it, I would end up applying for a job. I didn't sleep that night, not even for an hour. I sat with my laptop open until the sun came up, staring at that grainy old photo of my mother standing next to a man who currently signed my paychecks, trying desperately to talk myself into believing there was some explanation that didn't end where I already, somewhere deep down, knew it was going to end. I walked into Richard's office the next morning before anyone else had even arrived at the building, before he'd even taken his coat off, and I set the actual folder down on his desk, the real one, not photos I'd taken on my phone, the one with my name written on the tab in handwriting I now understood, with a sick certainty, probably belonged to him. I watched every bit of color drain out of his face the second he looked down and realized exactly what he was seeing sitting in front of him. My voice came out strange and flat when I finally managed to speak, barely recognizable as my own to my own ears. I told him I needed him to sit down and be completely honest with me, no matter how bad whatever he had to say turned out to be. He sat without arguing, without even trying to ask what this was about first, which told me almost as much as anything he'd say next. For a second, neither of us said anything at all, the silence stretching long enough that I could hear the building's heating system click on somewhere down the hall. Then I just laid it out plainly, that I had newspaper clippings from when I was 9 years old sitting in that folder on his desk, that someone had apparently been quietly collecting pieces of my entire life for over 20 straight years, and that I needed to know exactly why, and I needed the actual truth, not some carefully softened version he thought might go down easier for either of us. He sat there for a long moment, his hands pressed flat against the desk like he genuinely needed something solid just to steady himself enough to get the words out. And then, quietly, in a voice I'd never heard him use before, he told me he was my father, and that he had been since the day I was born, whether either of us had ever said those exact words out loud before that particular morning or not. I felt the floor tilt underneath me in that moment, even though some part of me had already known since the second I saw my own name written on that folder tab the night before. But hearing him actually say the words out loud, in his own voice, sitting 3 feet away from me, was an entirely different kind of collapse than reading a name on a birth certificate ever could have been. I asked him why, if all of that was true, he'd spent my entire life watching me from a careful distance instead of simply being my father. Why keep a folder full of newspaper clippings from a childhood spelling bee instead of just showing up to it in person like a parent would? He told me that my mother and he had been together years before I was born, that things ended badly between them, and that by the time she finally found the courage to tell him she was pregnant, he was already engaged to someone else entirely, a woman he went on to marry not long after. He said he made a choice back then that he had spent every single year since regretting in some quiet corner of himself, telling himself at the time that staying away completely was somehow the more honest, more responsible thing to do, because showing up halfway, showing up inconsistently, would have hurt the both of us far worse than not showing up at all. I asked him if that meant he'd simply watched instead, quietly, from the shadows, for over 20 years straight, and he admitted, his voice cracking slightly, that he couldn't stop himself from wanting to know that I existed somewhere out in the world, even after telling himself repeatedly that he didn't have any real right to actually be part of my life. I asked him if hiring me had been some kind of accident too, and he shook his head slowly and admitted that he'd recognized my name on the application the moment it landed on his desk, before anyone else had even reviewed it, that he could have simply thrown it in with all the other rejections and no one would have ever known the difference. But he told himself he just wanted to meet me once, in person, wanted to know who I had actually grown up to become, and that he never once planned on telling me any part of the truth, that he genuinely believed he could just quietly have this much, this small, borrowed closeness, and somehow let that be enough for the rest of his life. I stood there with my arms crossed so tightly against my chest that it actually started to hurt, staring at a man I had genuinely respected for 5 straight months, trying and failing to reconcile him with the stranger who had apparently been cataloging my entire childhood from the shadows the whole time I was growing up without him in it. I told him I wasn't going to scream at him, that I didn't think I even had that kind of anger left in me right in that moment, but that he needed to understand something clearly before I left this office. That watching someone from a careful distance for 20 years isn't love, that it isn't even remotely close to what being a father actually means. That a real father shows up. He doesn't clip newspaper articles out with scissors and lock them away in a drawer where no one will ever find them. He told me, quietly, that he knew that now, that some part of him had probably always known it, that he simply never figured out how to undo 20 years of the wrong choice without breaking something else even worse in the process. I told him he hadn't fixed a single thing by hiring me, that all he'd really done was find a new, closer way to keep watching me, somewhere I finally couldn't see him doing it anymore. He didn't argue with that at all. He just sat there in silence, and for the first time since I'd known him, in 5 months of thinking he was one of the strongest people I'd ever worked for, he looked genuinely, completely small. I told him I forgave him, because I actually meant it, because carrying that particular kind of anger forward felt too much like agreeing to live inside a prison of my own making, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in there. But I also told him plainly that I couldn't keep working for him, that I couldn't sit across a desk from him every single day now that I knew exactly what that locked drawer had meant, what all those years of silent, careful watching had actually cost the both of us in the end. I handed in my formal notice that same morning, before I even left the building. He didn't try to stop me, didn't ask me to reconsider, not even once. On my very last day, he was waiting by the front door when I walked out for the final time, the folder sitting inside a small cardboard box tucked under his arm. He held it out to me without saying a single word. I took it from him, held it against my chest for a long moment, feeling the weight of 20 years pressed between my hands, and told him he should have just been my father, instead of quietly collecting one from a distance. He nodded slowly, his eyes visibly wet, and told me he was sorry it took losing me twice to finally understand that. I walked out the door, and I didn't look back.